You may have noticed I'm not in my usual place today. I'm actually in Seoul right now, and while I'm in Seoul, I came to collect something that's going to help me with my next project. That's this stuff. And if you're thinking this does look familiar, this is a kombucha SCOBY that I got given because I asked around any of my friends to see if they had any kombucha SCOBY or kombucha starter. I got given one by my friends over at Evid, which is a Michelin star restaurant. So this is kind of like Michelin star kombucha SCOBY. Because in this video and series of videos, I'm going to be working on making my perfect kombucha. While I was at it as well, I went online and I picked up some other ingredients and materials that I'm going to need to make my kombucha. So first of all, most important thing, I've got green tea. Could also go for black tea, but I like to use green tea because it doesn't add too much extra flavor. So when it comes to like flavoring the kombucha with like fruit and other things, if you use green tea, you won't get much like the black tea bitterness or any of that kind of stuff. So green tea. I went online and I bought some organic sugar. I just wanted to get the best quality sugar that I could get. This might impart some flavor. I don't think so because it's not supposed to be like dark sugar or it doesn't have any molasses or anything. It's just organic cane sugar. And I just bought a 5-liter fermentation vessel, and I'm kind of starting off small with 5 liters, and I'm hoping by the end of this whole project I'm going to work up to maybe like 10-liter batches so that I can make maybe like 15 to 20 bottles of kombucha at any one time. Speaking of bottles, I'm going to be using these pressure safe flip top bottles. There's a whole difference between pressure safe and non-pressure safe bottles. These ones, the dead giveaway is that they're round. That is a pressure safe bottle, and if you want a quick example of something that's not pressure safe, this is not a pressure safe bottle, and you can tell because it has, well, first of all, this one's square. Every one of these edges of this square is a weak point, and you might get away with carbonating something very lightly in this, but I would not recommend it. You always want to go with something pressure safe. The company that I buy these from, Bormioli, they advertise this as a pressure safe bottle, so I can guarantee that I can carbonate kombucha, sodas and everything in this. And of course, before going into this, I've done quite a bit of research. I've basically kind of nailed down like a general recipe that I want to use for my kombucha, and from there I'm gonna kind of tweak it as I go through batches. But to start off the recipe, I'm working in liters because it's just the easiest way to do it. So I'm using liters and grams. So I wrote up the recipe that I'm going to start with for this batch of kombucha, which will be batch 001. And so for every 1 liter of water, I'm going to use 10 grams of green tea, 100 grams of organic sugar, and then 250 grams of kombucha starter. But I don't know if I've got 250 grams of kombucha starter in here. So we'll just use this whole batch of kombucha starter for kombucha number 1. Other than the method, which we're going to go through now, that's all that really is to make kombucha, is these 3 things. And then afterwards, when it comes to it, once we decide how we want to flavor it, that's when we can add like fruit, spices, herbs, all that kind of stuff. But for now, just to get this whole project started, I just need to make kombucha.
So the first thing I want to do is measure out my green tea. So I'm using a digital scale and a saucepan because I don't have any other sort of jug, and I'm measuring out 10 grams of loose leaf green tea.
Like I said, this is loose leaf green tea, and it's basically the whole leaf. This is pretty high quality stuff, all grown in Korea. And I find it tastes a little bit different to the green tea that I get in England. I find it's much milder, sweeter, and just generally like much more enjoyable for me.
I decided to divide up my 1 liter of water into 2 halves. The first half of my 1 liter I'm going to bring to a boil and then set it aside for a few minutes to come down in temperature a little before adding it to my green tea. Letting it cool down a little will help prevent some of the bitter flavors developing from the tea, and while the water is still hot, I'm also going to use this opportunity to add my sugar. So while on the digital scale, making sure to zero the scale, then add my 100 grams of organic cane sugar to the saucepan, and then I'll mix it to dissolve. Once all the sugar is dissolved, I'll leave this for 10 minutes to brew, and I noticed the temperature came down quite a bit during this 10 minutes of brewing, which is good since this can't be too hot when we add a kombucha SCOBY. But regardless, this next step is going to help bring that temperature down. I'll run the green tea through a coffee filter, and once again, since I don't have any sort of jug, I'm using a mixing bowl which I've placed a pair of tongs on top in order to hold the coffee filter. Now we're left with a pretty strong and pretty sweet green tea, to which I'm going to add the remaining 500 milliliters of our 1 liter of water, which will even out the green tea flavor, and it'll also bring our temperature right down to around or below body temperature, which is safe enough to add our SCOBY without killing it. But you can always check with the thermometer if you don't have one like me, Just stick a finger in it, and if it feels slightly cold, then it's safe temperature. If you need to wait a little longer for your tea to cool down, then go ahead and do that, but mine is sufficiently cool enough now to add to my fermentation vessel. After a day or two, the kombucha was doing great. In fact, better than any other kombucha I've ever made. I guess the starter that I was given was stronger than I expected. It even already formed a new pellicle on top, but I think the 1 liter of tea that I added wasn't going to be enough, so I went ahead and made another 1 liter batch of green tea the exact same way I made the initial batch of green tea. Covered it back up with the cheesecloth and then set it back to keep fermenting. Then fast forward a few days later and another pellicle is formed with the fresher batch of tea that I added. And at this point, I wanted to try bottling this kombucha before it gets too acidic. I'm going to start off by making a couple bottles of plain unflavored kombucha just to get an idea of what this may taste like. First thing I want to do, however, is filter this kombucha so I don't get any of the little floaty bits of SCOBY in the bottle. It's not bad or anything to get SCOBY in the kombucha, but it can feel a little weird if you accidentally get a mouthful of it. So I ran it through a coffee filter and then added it to a couple pressure safe flip top bottles. I did give this a little taste before bottling, and in my opinion, it's at its perfect level of acidity for me. So at this point, I'm wondering if I nailed the amount of sugar I added to the tea, but I'm still going to experiment with different levels of sugar. I did still have a bit of kombucha left over, so I decided to make some pomegranate kombucha. I went out and bought this bottle of 100% squeezed pomegranate juice, added 100 grams of the pomegranate juice to about 800 milliliters of kombucha. And if you're wondering why 800 milliliters, because I spilled about 100 milliliters of kombucha as I was aiming for 100 milliliters of pomegranate juice to 900 milliliters of kombucha. I should have really seen it coming with the angle of the coffee filter I was taking on as I poured. Regardless, I bottled the pomegranate kombucha. I managed to get about 1.5 bottles of pomegranate booch, which I closed up and then set under the kitchen sink to carbonate. So it's been like 2 days since I bottled these, and they're not carbonating too much. Maybe I gotta wait some more, but what I might actually do is add a tablespoon of sugar to each of these bottles. Just some extra sugar for the yeast to get a bit more carbonation going. On the other hand, the one that I made with the pomegranate juice, I'm guessing because of the extra sugar from the juice, I figure this is actually ready carbonated. I put it in the fridge for a little bit. I'm not going to open it just yet. I want it to get a little bit colder. But this has only been in the bottle for like 2 days. Maybe these have been like 3 or 4 days actually. But these have only been in the bottle for like 2 days and already doing a bit much better on carbonating. And when I tried this before I closed the bottle, it was really tasty. So hopefully this does really well. But we've got some floaty bits in there, which is some new SCOBY forming, new pellicle, a bit of dirt on the bottom, but that's fine. Hopefully this turns out pretty well. Because I used up almost all of my kombucha from that first batch, I made a second batch, but I changed up the recipe a little bit. So this is actually 5% sugar, so less sugar and a bit more tea. So I think I did 15 grams of tea for every liter, and then 50 grams of sugar, because I don't want this kombucha to be too like vinegary, too sour, too acidic. I want to try and like find the recipe that makes a nice balanced kombucha without having to like water it down. But you know, I'll have to water it down if I have to. But let's add some sugar to these. I don't have a funnel, so I'm gonna have to do this with a piece of paper. Which should be fine. That works fine. Give that a light shake just to dissolve some of the sugar. And I'm going to set these back under the sink in the cabinet. It's been another couple days since I added sugar to this kombucha, and I ended up just combining the 2 bottles that were like at halfway into 1 bottle, and then put it back to hopefully carbonate a little bit more. So we'll see how these have ended up. Man, time flies. 2 days already. I feel like I just did this. Let's open this. Let's see if it's carbonated at all. Okay, so it looks like this needs to go in for a few more days. So I'm going to close this back up, put this back under the sink for a few more days. So hopefully we can get this to carbonate. I don't have much experience with carbonated kombucha, so for me, it's just kind of like figuring out how long I really need to give for kombucha to carbonate. This one, on the other hand, I'm pretty sure is carbonated, even just a little bit. Yep, quite a lot actually. Let's give that a pour.
got a little bit of SCOBY in here, which I want to remove because not very pleasant. But other than that, I think that looks great. Let's give it a taste. Ooh. I think it definitely tastes better than it did the other day. Bit more tangy, bit more vinegary. It still kind of gets some of that fruitiness from the pomegranate, but it doesn't really taste like pomegranate. It kind of just tastes like fruitiness, like berry. But overall, very delicious. I'd say this one is a success, but I'm still going to play around with the levels of pomegranate juice. You may have to wait around for the next video for me to open up the other batch, but this is going to be the end of probably episode 1 of making kombucha, my perfect kombucha. Make sure you're sticking around for the next video.